Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the History of BBC Micro Typing Games, where I look at games listings for the Beeb that were published in the many computing magazines of the 8-bit era. As well as trying to work out if it was ever actually worth the time it took to type these games in, I also tried to pick out some interesting content from the magazines to help give a flavour of the home computing scene at that time. In this episode, I'll continue looking at magazines and typing games from 1985, exploring 5 publications from June to August of that year. In the last video of this series, we saw several games that were far beyond the simple basic listings of earlier years, with heavy use of machine code and extensive data statements. These weren't much fun to read or type in, but resulted in games with significantly better graphics, and in some cases more complex gameplay. Will that trend continue with this episode's batch of games? Let's find out. I'm kicking off this episode with the June 1985 edition of the Micro User, and the first thing I noticed is that the price has gone up since the last time I looked at this magazine in this series. At some point in 1985 it had a price increase by 25p to £1.25. There's an interesting cover on this one representing the article Build Your Own Wind Station, presumably using a BBC Micro based on this picture, although I can't believe you can actually power a Beeb using a handheld windmill, and even if you could, I'm not sure you're going to get much use out of it from this position. The headline game in this one is Othello, which offers board game strategy on your Micro, but you'll be glad to hear that's not the game I'm going to be looking at because there's another game in this magazine, and it is referred to at the bottom of the page with this cryptic sentence, Rescue Fido from the well. I'll get into that soon enough of course, but before that let's have a quick flick through the magazine and see what else is of interest. First up on page 16 and 17 is this advert for the AMX mouse, and this was my first experience of a mouse back in the mid to late 80s. As you can see, it's not got a very ergonomic design and the positioning of the cable is ridiculous. But of course this was early days for this kind of peripheral, so there are all kinds of different weird designs out there. The mouse comes packaged with the AMX Art graphics program, which I do remember playing around with when I was a kid, and the retail price for the package is $89.95. I can't imagine my dad would have paid that much for it, and I think if I remember rightly that we did get it second hand. There are also a couple of additional programs available, including AMX Desk, which is a rudimentary Windows program by the looks of it, and also AMX Utilities, which seems to be an expansion of the bundled art package. Not much more to say about this one other than it's a pretty well presented advert, but it got me wondering, what was your first experience of using a mouse? Let me know in the comments. Just a few pages on from that is the news section, which is extensive in this issue, with the lead story being Acorn adding a plus to the Model B. The piece says after months of intense speculation, the enhanced version of the BBC Micro has at last been launched, and the good news is that it's in the shops now. The Model B Plus, as it's known, has confounded pundits by being very different from their predictions. Tales of 128k page memory, new ULAs and ADFS as standard have proved to be nonsense, and in fact, as its name implies, the new model is more of an intelligent extension to the BBC Micro range rather than a radically different design. The rest of this lead article mainly deals with the technical specifications for the system, so I'm going to skip over that, but there are actually 2 other articles on this first page of this news section that are related to the Model B Plus as well. The first one's entitled No Price Cuts and mentions that the Model B Plus has bounced onto the scene complete with DFS at a cost of £499, but the company has no plans at the moment to provide a cassette version of the machine. It goes on to say that the arrival of the B Plus won't result in price reductions for the Model B itself, with Acorn's John Caswell saying there'll be no special offers, we're not in the business of discounts. Acorn will have a rigid pricing policy from here on in, and with the B Plus we believe we have the right machine at the right price. I'm not sure many home users would have agreed with that given the other options available at this point in time. The hype about this enhanced system continues in the final article entitled Advanced Orders Flood In. It says advance orders for the Model B Plus were reported to be heavy even before the new machine hit the streets. One distributor based in the north of England, Eltec of Bradford, received requests for 250 units in just 1 week, and that was almost a fortnight before the official launch date of May the 1st. So all this sounds very positive and makes it seem like Acorn were moving past those financial problems they had earlier in the year, but I'm not sure the Model B Plus was quite the success that Acorn hoped it to be. According to Wikipedia, it had a modest market impact and received a rather unsympathetic reception, with one reviewer's assessment being that the machine was 18 months too late and it must be seen as a stopgap, while others criticised the elevated price of £500 in the face of significantly cheaper competition providing as much or even twice the memory. I don't think I've got any memory of ever even being aware of the B Plus back in the 80s, and it was certainly short-lived as Acorn followed it up with another revision just a year later, but that's a story for another episode. Beyond all that Model B Plus hype, the rest of the news section includes stories about Acorn clinching a £1 million deal with Reuters, piracy in schools causing an educational company to stop producing software on tape, the BBC Micro being used to help disabled people find work, and the introduction of a Spanish-language Beeb in Mexico. It was a busy period indeed. For the final thing I want to look at in this magazine before moving to the games listing, I've moved all the way towards the back to page 163 and this advert for Chucky the upgrade from Bit Twiddlers. It says if you already own the popular game of Chucky Egg, then Chucky will provide 3 speeds, 8 new screens, selecting your starting level, variable extended jump and the ability to design your own screens. It goes on to say yes, after you've mastered the original screens and our screens, you can edit the data statements in the main program and design your very own, and it says it's creative and educational and approved by A&F Software. Also mentioned are similar upgrades for Killer Gorilla and Monsters. I recall that these hacks for some of the most well-known games on the Beeb were quite popular, and while I don't know if it was this one specifically, I definitely remember playing a hack of Chucky Egg that allows you to select your starting level and have an extended jump. It's also interesting to see that A&F Software, the publishers of Chucky Egg, actually approved this, or at least that's what it says in the advert. I very much doubt that Acornsoft approved the hacking of their monsters though. Nevertheless, it's interesting to see how some enterprising coders were making money off the back of other people's hard work. I've now jumped back just over 20 pages for the games listing from this magazine that I'm interested in, and this is Catnap, which is illustrated by a nice cartoon of a man in a bucket trying to catch a mouse, and also a screenshot of the game. The intro to this one says, I know they say cats have 9 lives, but in this action-packed game, Fido, an exceedingly oddly named cat, takes it a little too far. Poor Fido has fallen down a well. She is, however, a little reluctant to come out owing to the abundance of mice down there. You can only rescue her by going down on the bucket and collecting all the mice. You must then be careful to return to the top before she does, or else she'll run away. Fido can climb the rope as well as jump over gaps. Both these things you're able to do yourself, but being a vaguely superstitious cat, she'll not go under ladders. It finishes by saying, can you tempt Fido out of the well? You must remember not to bump into her on your travels, and be careful too not to fall down the well or run out of time. It certainly sounds like an interesting idea, and the listing begins on the next page, along with the customary box outs that feature in most micro-user listings, giving an overview of the procedures and variables used within the game. A quick skim through those procedure details doesn't really reveal anything especially extraordinary. You've got procedures for setting up the high score table, setting up the screen, moving the man, cat and bucket, drawing ladders and checking for mice, death routine, changing the direction of the cat, and controlling the race for home when all mice are caught, along with a final procedure dealing with the Hall of Fame. The variables are also fairly straightforward, although it does mention that there are user-defined characters in use for the man and the cat, coordinates for the man and the cat, also the coordinates of the bucket and whether it's up or down, the number of mice taken, positional point values around the man and the cat, and finally some arrays and variables dealing with the high score table. On this first page of the listing you can clearly see the definition of character sprites and sound envelopes, followed by a number of lines dealing with the printing of the instructions. The listing continues over another 3 pages, with a final line count of just over 280. Like nearly all micropower listings, the text spread across 3 columns and is clearly printed and pretty easy to read, with any lines containing multiple statements that are separated by colons, having them spread out over multiple lines on the page. So a pretty easy one to type in by the looks of it, and the whole listing is in BASIC, so it's pretty easy to work out what's going on and make changes if you wanted to. With that in mind, I'm not going to delve any deeper into the listing itself and move on to looking at the game. Just as you knew was going to happen, the game begins by displaying some instructions, also playing a short tune as it does so. The presentation of these is decent enough, but the content's exactly the same as it was in the introduction in the magazine, so I'm not going to repeat it. The only additional bit of information you're given is that you get an extra man after the 3rd level, and you're also given the keyboard controls, which are the classic Z and X for left and right, and asterisk and question mark for up and down. You can also choose to have the sound on or off with Q and S, and pause and restart with P and R. Pressing any key then starts the game, and your man begins at the top of the well with the aim of collecting all the mice on the level. You can move up and down the well on the rope and bucket in the centre of the screen, but this works like an uncontrollable elevator. You can't actually move up and down the rope yourself. When you reach each mouse you must push up to extend a ladder to collect them. This has the secondary purpose of blocking off the movement of the cat, which is lethal to the touch by the way. Once you've collected all the mice you must make your way to the top of the well to complete the stage, but the cat's trying to do the same thing, and if it makes it first you fail the level and must start again. As if all that wasn't difficult enough, there's also a time limit to contend with too. The graphics for this game are pretty simple, with solid blocks to create the layout of the well and single character sprites for the objects, player and cat, but there is some animation and both the cat and mice have a charming quality about the way they're implemented. Sound effects are similarly simple, but there are also short jingles between levels or when you have to restart after losing a life. The game has very good presentation, as along with the instructions you also get a high score table, a comprehensive in-game status display and even the encouragement to play again by telling you how close you were to the high score if you didn't achieve it. The gameplay in this one is infuriatingly addictive, with clever design of the levels and the need for strategy to complete them. You have to place the ladders to stop the cat running into you and ensure that you get back to the top of the well first, so you need to work from the bottom up so that you're close to the top where you collect the last mouse. The addition of a timer adds urgency to the game and also the ability to earn bonus points, so that encourages you to work out the quickest way to complete the levels. It's not an easy game as the controls are a little twitchy, which can sometimes lead to you mistiming entry into the well or moving over the rope instead of grabbing it, which can potentially cost you lives or time. The cat really seems to be a little bastard sometimes too, running into you just when you think you're safe or nipping up the rope to beat you to the end of the level. Cats do have that reputation though, don't they? Catnapper may look quite primitive, but it's definitely an original and well thought out idea that encourages replaying, and you will get better at it the more you persevere. At under 300 lines, this is actually one of the shorter listings I've looked at recently, and I do think it would have been worth the effort as I had a lot of fun playing it as I got into it. The next magazine I'm going to take a look at is issue number 3 of Computer Gamer, dated June 1985, and you may recall if you watched the last episode of this series, which I'm presuming you did, that I looked at the debut issue of that magazine along with the second one because the featured listing actually spanned across 2 issues. That's not the case this time around though, so I'll just be looking at this one, and as you can see the front cover feature is Tinker Tailor Gamer Spy, the 4th Protocol taped. No idea what that is. I assume there's a game based on the 4th Protocol, but I know nothing about that. The one thing that did stand out though is this screenshot of Acornsoft's Revs on the BBC Micro, which the magazine asks, is it another Elite? Well, I'm going to be looking at the review of that game in this magazine along with a couple of other features, so let's jump in. First up, I've jumped to page 10 and the Gallup Gaming chart. Just as in the first issue of the magazine, we've got a multi-format chart on the left hand side and then separate top 10s for the Spectrum, Commodore and BBC Micro. Topping the multi-format chart, along with the Spectrum and Commodore specific ones, is a charity compilation, Soft Aid, which was produced to raise money for the Ethiopian famine, much like the Band Aid and Live Aid initiatives. That compilation contained 10 games from a variety of high-profile publishers for just £5, so it's no wonder it topped the charts. As you know, I've got a heavy interest in compilations myself, and Soft Aid is one that's on my list to play in the coming months. Most of the multi-format top 10 includes exactly the kind of games you'd expect to feature midway through 1985, including Activision's Ghostbusters, Spy Hunter, Impossible Mission, Football Manager, Daley Thompson's Decathlon and Bruce Lee. Perhaps the most surprising entry in that top 10, considering that it's a UK chart, is World Series Baseball from Imagine in second place. It's also interesting to see several Mastertronic games in this top 50, including Finders Keepers, Vegas Jackpot, Formula 1 Simulator and Chiller, all proving that $1.99 price tag was a gateway to high sales figures. The BBC Micro top 10 is not hugely different from the one I looked at in the last episode of this series, with Castle Quest and Elite taking first and second place, and other games like Combat Links, Football Manager and Manic Miner also present. This time around though, there are a few BBC Micro exclusives, including the bizarre inclusion of Mini Office in 6th place, which is obviously not a game. There's also Imagine Software's Wizardor, which is bizarrely described as Wizardor, and the Micro user's multi-event sports game Micro Olympics is also present, albeit near the bottom of the table. I've moved on to the feature the magazine calls Coin-Op Connection, which is a roundup of some of the latest games to hit the arcades, complete with lots of colour screenshots. This is something I would have loved when I was a kid, and I did look at it briefly in the first issue of the magazine last time around, but this time I want to take a look at it in more detail. The reason it stood out to me initially is that one of the games featured is Bank Panic, which happens to be my wife's favourite game. She's really good at it and can get over 1,000,000 points, and she actually set the world's highest known score for a female player on the machine at the classic Funspot arcade in New Hampshire in the States back in 2013. Anyway, aside from that, there are 2 games from Atari featured, including a golf game and Marble Madness, but it's the other 2 games whose pictures are featured that I'm more interested in because I'd never heard of them before. The first of those is Splendor Blast, which is featured in 3 screenshots, and the article says the initial impression is a cross between Pole Position and Zaxxon, though of course it's nothing like it. The game is based on an intergalactic race, and you start off on Earth, then race to the Moon, then the Sun, then Orion, and so on. You're represented by a small spaceship in the centre of the screen, and the terrain rushes up to you in an excellent 3D effect. En route, you must pick up energy and extra missiles, which you need to blast away objects you can't avoid. You can also pick up a shield that prevents you destroying yourself, a turbo that increases your speed to such a rate that the ship becomes almost uncontrollable, and a side thruster that vastly increases your manoeuvring ability. Having discovered this game, I watched a short video of it on YouTube, and it looks like quite a decent game with a similar vibe to Nintendo's later game F-Zero, albeit with more shooting involved. The other game that caught my eye, which isn't actually an arcade machine, is Sprint Start, which is pictured on the right hand side and looks like a combination between an exercise bike and a video game. The write-up says the screen displays a great deal of status information and a graphical view of you and the opposing computer bike. An interesting point to note is that it initially says you shouldn't use it if you drink, are old, or have a heart problem. There's no further information about it, and presumably it wasn't manufactured in large quantities, but I can only imagine that if you found one of these now and it was still working, it would cost you a fortune. Moving on now to the reviews section of the magazine, and let's take a look at the review of Revs, which was mentioned on the front cover. It gets almost a full page review with a screenshot, and begins by saying Revs has received a type of pre-release publicity that Elite got before its release, and with good reason. It goes on to say that the game itself is a highly accurate simulation of Formula 3 racing, the very same formula that Acorn themselves sponsor in the form of David Hunt, who is James Hunt's brother. It then says the game was written in conjunction with David Hunt and the author of the immensely popular Aviator 3D game. Strange that they're happy to mention a semi-famous racing driver but don't want to mention the name of the actual developer, Jeff Crammond. Plenty of information is given about the technical aspects of the game, and of course how to play it, but the key thing I wanted to pick out was that the reviewer says once you start the race it really hots up. The parallel here will obviously be with Pole Position from Atari, which was until now the best racing game that you could get for the BBC, but then goes on to say now even this classic has been surpassed. When you're on the starting grid and see all those cars spread out before you, the sense of realism is incredible. The review's rounded off by saying all in all the best racing game I've ever seen on any computer, and a real must for any BBC owner. High praise indeed, and that's borne out by the game ratings, with Revs getting 5 out of 5 for originality, graphics, use of machine and value for money, and an overall star rating of Supernova. I'm not sure it really should have got 5 out of 5 for originality, given it's just a motor racing simulation, but I don't suppose you could argue with any of the other scores at the time it was released. All the game listings are grouped together at the back of this magazine, and on page 93 is the BBC Micro offering Snake Maze, which has a very dramatic picture of lots of snakes blasting each other, which wouldn't be a lot of fun to look at if you're afraid of them. The authors for this one are mentioned at the top of the introduction, Carlos Augusto and Duarte Dondao. These sound like they might be Spanish or Portuguese, which would make for a pretty unusual origin for a BBC Micro game. The introduction says Snake Maze is a machine code game for the 32K BBC computer or Electron. You're in control of a laser green snake through 5 different mazes, fighting a red snake and some evil ghosts. It then gives an overview of how to play the game, but I'm going to skip that because that's covered in the in-game instructions. At the end though, it says the game is in 3 parts, you must carefully type each one of them and save them one after the other on the same tape. To play the game you just type chain and that's it. It also says that the game runs on an Electron, but Mode 7 statements for the instructions and high score table will look a bit strange, but this can easily be changed by Electron users. There is a bit of an assumption there the Electron users will know exactly what to do. The listing follows on the next 4 pages, with 3 columns of code per page. The scan quality isn't the best in places here, so I'm not going to look at it in too much detail, but you can see that Program 1 consists almost entirely of data statements, which is something I've seen on several of these multi-program listings now. Program 2 is the real meat of the game, with over 450 lines, the majority of which are machine code commands. As you'll probably know by now, my knowledge of machine code is very limited, so the only thing I'm going to say about this listing is it's very clearly laid out and easy to copy. The third listing ties everything together, with a number of calls to procedures defined in this listing, and also numerous callouts to the previously defined machine code routines. That final program is about 180 lines, so when you add that on top of the 450 for the second listing, and more than 50 for the first, we're looking at a pretty hefty amount of effort to type this one in. Let's now take a look at the game and see if it would have been worth it. The game begins with a simple but nicely presented title screen in Mode 2, with a few of the game sprites on the left hand side, and the title saying As Microsoft presents Snake Maze by C. Ron Dow. No mention of the other contributor from the magazine here. As Microsoft is very hard to say and presumably some kind of foreign word, which gives weight to the fact that this one originated outside of the UK. You're asked if you want to see the instructions, and if you choose to, then the game switches to Mode 7 to display them. Pretty simple presentation here, but it says in this game you control a green snake in a maze and must avoid the red ghost and the red snake head. Your objective is to kill the other snake, shooting her behind, so it's a female snake it would appear. Each dead snake takes you to a new maze. If you eat the strawberry, the ghosts turn green for a while, you can also shoot them to get extra points. You must also be careful not to shoot yourself. It then declares some slightly unusual keyboard controls, with A and Z for up and down, and V and B for left and right, along with space to fire. VB and space are very close together on the keyboard, so that's going to be a little bit awkward. Pressing any key starts the game, and the playfield is drawn on the screen, with your green snake at the top right and the opposing red one in the bottom left. This is a clone of the obscure arcade game Jungler, which was developed by Konami in 1981. It mixes elements of Snake, Pac-Man and the Tron Light Cycle game, adding shooting into the mix as well, as you must eliminate all segments of the red snake from behind to complete a stage before it shoots you. The graphics aren't bad, using some multicoloured characters to recreate those of the arcade version reasonably well, albeit in a more chunky fashion due to the use of Mode 2. The sound effects are very basic though, and there's no music. The gameplay is fast paced and often confusing due to the snake changing direction when it hits a wall, and when both snakes are long it can become a bit cramped. I feel it would have worked better in a different graphics mode given how fast it moves, as you'd have more chance to react if the play area was larger. It took quite a few games before I made any significant progress, but after a while it did get a little easier. The game is impressive in terms of speed and the reaction to controls, benefiting from that use of machine code. After a certain number of levels, the maze layout does reset to the one from the first stage, but I think the difficulty level increased at that point. This is quite a good quality game for a type-in, but it's definitely very challenging and the inaccessible high score table makes perseverance unappealing. You need over 8,000 points to get into it, and even on my best game I was still several thousand away from that. It is a pretty good clone of the arcade game, but there's a reason that game is not very well known and I'm not sure you'd get enough value from it compared to the time it would have taken to type in. It was interesting to see a game for the Beeb that was seemingly developed in another country though, as generally the system didn't get a lot of interest outside Britain. It's that time again where I say thank you to all my channel members, whose names you can see here in my Supporters Hall of Fame. If you're enjoying this video and would like to join these fine folks and support my efforts, why not become a member yourself? For a monthly fee starting from just 99p, you can get access to the special membership perks shown on screen, and more besides. If you're interested, then please click on the join button below this video for more information. Up next is a publication that's featured fairly regularly in previous episodes of this series. This is issue number 122 of Home Computing Weekly, dated July the 23rd to the 29th, 1985. And the first thing that stood out to me from this one is this exclusive offer from Mastertronic, 50p off Tronic's membership for Home Computing Weekly readers. I'll definitely be taking a closer look at that. First though, let's take a look at this news article on the front page with the headline "Pirates' Days Are Numbered." It says British software houses have given unanimous backing to the new legislation that makes software theft and piracy illegal. The overwhelming consensus view is that the industry can now, with the backing of the law and the appointment of the Federation Against Software Theft Enforcement Coordinator, carry out a concerted campaign to track down and prosecute the software pirates. It later says that Robert Hay, the former Metropolitan Police Superintendent who helped run the command centre during the Iranian embassy siege and is now FAST's enforcement coordinator, said people must be educated to realise that if home copying is widespread, the industry will be in danger of disappearing. There are then a number of quotes from representatives of different software houses who are all obviously in favour of the legislation, with the final quote coming from Nick Alexander of Virgin Games, who said a year ago there were 300 software houses, today there are around 100. Piracy is a major factor contributing to this situation. Going on to say that many of the youngsters who do home copying will be looking for employment in this industry. When they start ringing around the software houses for jobs as programmers, they'll find there's only a fraction of the jobs that used to be there. People who copy are cutting off their noses to spite their face. So this was something of a landmark in the fight to protect software houses' intellectual property, though I'm not sure those youngsters who were copying at home were particularly affected by this. Let's now take a look at that special offer that was on the front of the magazine, which it said was on page 46, but is actually on page 41. This offer gave the opportunity to get 50p off the subscription fee for Tronics, the Mastertronic user magazine, or as it says here, immerse yourself in Mastertronics info by taking up our discount offer for membership at the new Tronics Club. There's some very murky pictures of some Mastertronic games across the top there, and the offer is introduced by saying Mastertronic, the budget software label, has recently launched a new club for all its fans, and in a unique offer for HCW readers, we can give you a discount on the membership fee. It goes on to say members of the club will receive a quarterly club magazine called Tronics, packed full of interesting content for computer fans. After giving an overview of the content of the magazine, it then says each new member will also receive a free Tronics badge and a free Tronics pen in their membership pack. It then says there's one other free gift and we've saved the best until last. Each new member can choose one Mastertronic title from the full list as a free gift. This means your membership of the club costs you nothing, as Mastertronic games themselves sell for $1.99 in the shops, as I'm sure everybody watching this already knew. So actually, this offer gave you the opportunity to pick up a Mastertronic game for less than retail price and also get a subscription to the magazine, which is obviously just a canny marketing ploy by the company to try and get you to buy more games. I'm a little bit sad that I was too late in the game to take advantage of this offer, as I didn't really get into Mastertronic games until I got my Commodore 64 in 1988. If anyone watching this was a member of the Tronics Club and still has any of the memorabilia, I'd love to find out more about it. On the following page we've got the letters section, and there was a letter here that I thought was absolutely hilarious. It's been titled Incompatible, and it comes from Karen Rolfe of Heaton, and she says, "Does HCW stand for Hearts Club Weekly?" So Malcolm Logan from HCW 119 would like to know my age. Well, I'm 14 years old. I really hope Malcolm Logan was a similar age. She goes on to say, "I'm rather disappointed to read that he says, what is there apart from computers and girls? Surely they should have read girls and computers, especially if he hopes to make an impression." And she rounds off by saying, "Pity owns an Amstrad and not a C64 like me. Otherwise we could have got our computers together and made some fine music." Karen was clearly a woman of exquisite taste. Time to take a look at the game listing in this magazine then, and it's just a couple of pages back from what I've just been looking at. It's called Swimming, and the intro says it's time to climb into your costumes and test the water in this 2-player game from Stuart Smalley. The game consists of racing a swimmer against another player or the computer, and it then goes on to explain the keyboard commands, noting that they can be altered by changing the in-key values in lines 340 to 390. The remaining 2 paragraphs don't really say anything insightful, so I'll move on to the listing, and you can see that there's a box out detailing all the variables in the game, which is awkwardly spread across 2 columns. The listing then begins, and it only takes up just over a page, with just over 140 lines, so not a very long or complex program. A quick skim through it doesn't really reveal anything interesting that I haven't covered in prior episodes. It's a straightforward basic listing with use of procedures, user-defined characters, sound envelopes, and there's also a few arrays used to assist with the display and movement of the swimmers. I'm not really seeing anything worthy of in-depth analysis though, so I'll quickly move on and take a look at the game. As you'll easily have predicted if you saw the end of the listing, the game begins with some instructions, and I'm sure you expected those anyway even if you didn't notice them in the magazine. It largely just repeats the information from the magazine, saying Player 1 controls the top swimmer who is moved by pressing A and Z alternately and turned by pressing S. Player 2 controls the bottom swimmer with the keys colon, slash and semicolon. You must reach the edges of the screen before turning or your length will not be allowed, and if you select the one player option then the computer will control the bottom player. You're then prompted to enter the game options, which is the number of players, the difficulty level, with the lower number being the higher difficulty, and the number of lengths you want to swim. I do wonder how high a number you could put in for that, but I went with 10 for a reasonable sort of start. Once you've selected the options, the game begins, and this is obviously inspired by the Hypersports or Daley Thompson multi-event sports games, although in this case it's just the one event. The graphics are reasonably good for a basic game, although the colour choices aren't the best, and it did amuse me that there seems to be a load of chairs for an audience to sit on, but they're all empty. The sound effects are limited to annoying beeps, which is a shame because the water splashing sound should have been achievable. When the game begins, there's no starting countdown, the race just starts immediately, so you have to be ready to get going straight away. The gameplay is of course very basic button bashing, but the default keys are awkward. You'd really expect them to be side by side rather than above each other, though they could easily be changed as the mag noted. The button to turn around when you reach the end of the pool is a unique idea, and an alternative to breathing as is more typical for swimming events in these games, but having to press the key to do that just serves as a distraction that slows you down. The options for difficulty and number of lengths that you pick before the game allow for plenty of flexibility, and it's also good that it has options for either a second player or a CPU opponent, though beating the latter will prove challenging. There's no scrolling in the game, so each length is just the screen width, and if you choose a low number of lengths then the race is over pretty quickly. It's hard to get any kind of rhythm with the button bashing, possibly due to poor keyboard response times, so it's not really much fun to play in any respect. As a standalone game, this is pretty awful, but it could possibly be combined with other sporting event typings to create a multi-event sports game. You could also probably adapt the game engine to make a bleep test running game, where you have to get to the other side of the screen in a set time before the bleep, with the time between bleeps decreasing the longer you last. That would actually be more fun than this game, and more original too. The next magazine I'm taking a look at is also from July 1985. This is Personal Computer World, which is a magazine I've featured in many previous episodes, and there's a very strange image on the front cover. It's a combination of cricket stumps and ball, and a Commodore 128 with the headline Hat Trick or Howler, exclusive, Commodores 128 tested. I was thinking of taking a closer look at this, but this is supposed to be a BBC Micro focused series, so I decided not to. But if you want to, then you know which magazine to find it in. This edition of the magazine features 306 pages, and as usual, there's a ton of adverts amongst them. And the first one I'm going to look at is for the Robocom BitStick 2, which is described as a full computer-aided drafting system for the BBC Model B. This certainly looks like an interesting bit of kit, but not the kind of thing you're likely to have found in your local high street, because it's obviously very specific to the kind of people that want to use this device. It seems to have some kind of movable joystick and a number of buttons around it, along with what I think is a wrist rest. The overview says BitStick 2 is the affordable solution to your technical drafting problems, if you had them. Designed to take full advantage of your BBC's powerful graphics facility, the system is easy to learn and fast to operate. It incorporates a range of impressive functions, clearly displayed on screen as menus and palettes. These are selected via the BitStick hand controller, which also controls a dynamic rubber-banded drawing cursors. Amongst the system's impressive list of capabilities are auto-dimensioning, adjustable curves, precision grids and angle locks, powerful zoom and pan, scale drawing and text, and a graphic library index. It goes on to say BitStick 2 is produced in the UK by Robocom, the people behind the best-selling Robo system of CAD packages for the Apple II. To run BitStick 2, you'll need a BBC Model B with 6502 secondary processor, twin disk drives and colour or monochrome monitor. Quality hard copy can be produced from a wide range of supported plotters. This sounds like it would have been very expensive, and there is the opportunity to test draw a BitStick to see for yourself how the BitStick 2 system can make your drafting projects easier. And this was a blast from the past. At the bottom it says, dial 100 and ask the operator for free phone Robo, and they'll put you directly in touch with your local RoboCAD centre. So yeah, definitely an interesting bit of kit that I've never seen before. If anyone watching ever used the Robo BitStick 2 or has one now, then let me know in the comments what it was like. Next up in this magazine, I'm taking a look at Screenplay, which is the games review section. I don't think I've ever looked at this in any previous issues of Personal Computer World, and the first thing I noticed was there's a very familiar set of spaceships across the top of the page there, which nowadays would probably have Disney's lawyers on the phone to the magazine. Anyway, the reason I'm looking at this section is there's yet another review of Acorn Soft's Revs here, this time complete with 3 colour screenshots. The review begins by saying Aviator and Elite are hard acts to follow, but Acorn Soft has done it again with Revs, a full-colour motor racing game which looks set to emulate the success of its predecessors. Much of the review is pretty similar to the one I looked at in Computer Gamer earlier, likening the game to Atari's Pole Position, but also saying that it straddles the boundary between pure arcade and simulation. In the penultimate paragraph, the reviewer says racing is difficult and takes a lot of concentration. Not only do you have to deal with the perils of coping with your own car, but also have to make sure you don't bump into anyone else. Even the slightest knock can send you careering onto the grass. The review's rounded up by saying I wouldn't normally rave about a motor racing game as there are far too many of them, but Revs has something different to offer. The graphics surpass even the excellent Aviator, achieving a stunning authenticity that will be difficult to match in the future. That was perhaps true in the short-term future of 8-bit micros, but I think we can all agree that over the last 40 years the authenticity of racing games has obviously surpassed this admittedly impressive offering. Moving on to another advert, and this is one of many that I could have picked out from this magazine. This one's introducing the Tulip System PC series. There can be only one winner in the PC compatibles race. Yep, we're now into the era of IBM PC compatibles, which for desktop PCs obviously designed to be compatible with IBM's hardware and software, but for a lower price. You can see here a pretty familiar looking setup, with a desktop unit that contains the hardware and includes a disk drive, a separate keyboard and a monitor perched on top. This advert's offering 2 systems starting from £1,150, the Tulip System PC Advance and the Tulip System PC Compact. Let's take a quick look at the specs for these two and see what over £1,000 would get you back in 1985. If we look at the Advanced system, you get an 8MHz 8086 processor, 128K RAM expandable to 640K, 7-colour 640x200 resolution graphics format, a pretty standard set of expansion ports for the time, a 40-track 360KB floppy disk drive, and the option to add either a 10 or 32MB hard drive. The system's also bundled with MS-DOS 3.1 and GW Basic. When you compare that spec to a modern PC or even just your smartwatch, you can really appreciate just how much technology has advanced in the last 40 years. Let's look at the game listing from this magazine now, and as you can see, the title is Revenge of the Flying Bunnies, and who couldn't be interested in a game with that name? The introduction says not only is the title of this game totally ridiculous, the game itself is equally silly but is challenging and well finished. You're an alien stealing carrot juice from a carrot patch which is guarded by 4 flying rabbits. 3 of the rabbits are fairly harmless, but one of them is a killer. Revenge of the Flying Bunnies runs on a BBC Model B, full instructions are included in the programme and it really is worth typing in, honest. A very brief introduction to the game there, and as with all listings in Personal Computer World, there's no information about the structure of the programme, you have to work it out for yourself. This listing spans about 4 pages with a total line count of just over 400, though if you look closely you can see that between each section of code there's several blank lines, so that means the listing isn't quite as long as it first appears, and it also means that there would have been plenty of natural breakpoints when you were typing this one in. That makes it a lot easier to get through. As far as the content of the listing goes, it all seems to be in BASIC, and there's plenty of familiar elements such as sound envelopes, user-defined characters, and an initial game routine that sets up some variables before calling procedures to execute the main game code. There's also a huge section that defines and prints the instructions, so if you really wanted to you could skip that completely and save typing in about 60 lines. Other elements that stand out are again things I've seen many times before, such as the graphical plotting commands like move, gcall and draw, which feature prominently in this procedure around line 3500. As with all PCW listings, the text size is quite small, but it is clearly printed, so you wouldn't have had too much trouble typing this one in if you wanted to. That's enough at looking at the listing then, so let's move on and check out the game. As I already just noted when looking at the listing, this one's got some pretty extensive instructions, and the first page says you're an innocent little alien who by accident lands on a carrot patch. But this is no ordinary patch, it's guarded by 4 rabbits who have sworn revenge for the death of their prized carrot which took them 2,000 years to grow. Anyway, you're stuck in the middle of the carrot patch and have to get the carrot juice by sitting on top of a carrot. You'll automatically suck the juice out, but the rabbits are constantly chasing you. 3 of the rabbits are not dangerous, but one of them's a killer. The others jump on you to stop you sucking the juice. You may also use a super suck which allows you to suck a lot of juice while playing, but only 3 times. Pressing a key then moves on to the second page which gives you the keyboard controls, which by default are the BBC Micro standard plus S to execute the super suck and escape to execute a super suicide. It goes on to explain that the suicide is when you feel that you're close to death, and this will drain all your carrot juice, energy and lives, but will also kill all the rabbits and give you many points. The implication there is that that'll end the game completely, so as it says you should only use it in an emergency. You then get the option to change the movement controls to another BBC favourite, A and Z for up and down, and greater than and less than for left and right. Once you've decided which key to use, you then press any key to start the game. This game has quite an unusual premise, and it wasn't really clear what to do from the instructions, but it soon became obvious and intuitive once I started playing. It has simple but colourful graphics, with the majority of the sprites being multicoloured, making them a cut above the average basic typing. The rabbits are nicely animated too, and there are some good sound effects such as when you suck the juice from the carrots. The player movement is smooth and the controls are responsive, though using S to do the super suck is awkward, and it would have been better implemented as pressing space or return. It's a reasonably inventive arcade-style game that blends the aesthetics of a Robotron-style arena shooter with gameplay that's an enhancement of the Thargoids game that I featured in the first episode of this series, where the enemies home in on you every time you move. The overall presentation is good, and there are also some clever visual effects on show when you use the super suck and suicide options. Unfortunately, it gets quite monotonous constantly moving around the play area avoiding the bunnies before they inevitably get you as they begin to speed up. All the rabbits look and behave the same, so it would add some variety if some looked and moved differently, as they all just bunch together and chase you as it stands. The super sucks give you the opportunity to stay in the game longer, but you only get 3, so it really needs bonus ones to be awarded at certain score thresholds or levels reached. Another improvement would be if you move slightly faster the more carrot juice you have, to give you the chance of getting ahead of the enemies on later stages. As a high score challenge game it works well enough, but there's not really enough variety to the gameplay to make it worth playing over and over again. The listing is pretty long, but being all in BASIC it's quite easy to type in, so it may have been worth it just to give you the baseline for developing something more interesting. For the final magazine in this episode, I go full circle back to the Micro user, and this time the August 1985 edition. Just like the one I looked at earlier, this has got another strange cover showing the mouse organ where it says give your BBC Micro a 5-octave keyboard. I had a quick glance at that, and it's a program that allows you to create a musical keyboard that you operate using the AMX mouse, which I looked at an advert for earlier. The only other noteworthy thing to pick out from this cover is on the left hand side it says Fun Time, where it gives you an overview of the 2 games featured in this issue, and the one I'm interested in is mentioned first. It says Repel Raiders in Quickfire Harbour Command. There also appears to be a fruit machine simulator, but I'm not remotely interested in that. Just as I did in the earlier issue, the first thing I'm going to do in this one is take a look at the news section, which this time has an advert for one of my favourite BBC Micro platform games, Boffin, on the facing page, making a big thing about that giant spider that appears on certain levels. The lead news item this time around says the BBC Model B may be discontinued, and this is the story that Acorn has come out with the first public indication that it isn't going to make any more Model B micros and wants to divest itself of secondary interests, including Acorn Soft. It says that Acorn chairman Alex Reid made a live appearance on Micronet 800's celebrity chatline and was uncharacteristically forthcoming during a 2-hour session. Responding to a question about public response to the new Model B Plus, he said they are buying it and I'm sure they'll buy more when we run out of the basic B model. It goes on to refer to the company's financial problems that occurred earlier in the year, saying the massive inventory of unsold micros that has caused Acorn's recent cash flow problems, leading to the Olivetti rescue following disappointing Christmas sales, was a logical reason for halting the Model B production line, but Chairman Reid's off-the-cuff remark on Micronet was the first official hint from Acorn that the machine is unlikely to be revived. It goes on to say Reid was similarly open about Acorn Soft. It had been generally known that the software phone was available at the right price, rumoured to be in the region of £1 million, but nothing had been said by Acorn until Reid was asked point blank why is Acorn selling its most profitable division, Acorn Soft. His answer was that they were seeking to concentrate on central activities and to raise cash to plough back into the company. Apparently, several major software producers were said to be interested in buying Acorn Soft, with Firebird amongst them. It seems that once again Acorn was going through some tumultuous times. Another news item on the same page features more quotes from Reid's appearance on that Micronet chat. He claimed the BBC B Plus is a bargain at £499, saying if a £500 machine lasts for 5 years and you use it for half an hour a day, it costs less than 1 penny a minute to use. What a bargain. Unfortunately, a news item a couple of pages on disputes that claim. Titled B Plus is wrapped on price, this rounds up some of the reviews of the new computer, and most of them aren't particularly complimentary. Practical Computing's Roger Cullis gave the machine a B Plus for compatibility and potential, but C- for timing and price. He said the B Plus is 2 years late, yet it still bears indications such as the outmoded DFS software that it was released in a hurry. He went on to say the question is, at a price just short of £500 for some not very new technology, does it stand a chance? And I think we already know the answer to that based on what I read earlier from Wikipedia. Moving on from the news section, on page 65 is an advanced user quiz asking how well do you know your BBC Micro, and it asks 10 very difficult questions about the Beeb and I have almost no idea what the answers are. I'll read through them all now, or you can pause the video to read through the questions yourself, and if you think you know the answer to any of them then please leave them in the comments. Question 1 is what single command will print out the basic version number after pressing break? Question 2 is which star command is equivalent to BASIC's rem? Question 3, what is the name of the chip responsible for the Mode 7 teletext display? So far, I'm 0 for 3. Question 4 asks how many chips make up the BBC B Plus's 64K of RAM. I'm going to guess 16. Question 5, is the result of 3 EOR 3 true or false? Now I think I know this one, EOR is an exclusive OR and I think the answer to this is false, but it is a 50-50 chance of getting the right answer. Question 6 is what is the largest positive number an integer variable can represent? Question 7 is which bit of the 6502 status register is unused? Question 8 asks in which order are the high and low bytes of the return address pushed on the stack when JSR is executed? Again, no idea. Question 9 asks whose name is in the BASIC 2 ROM, and question 10 is what is the maximum number of envelopes that can be defined? So as I said, very difficult questions indeed, but if you think you know the answers, then leave them in the comments and you can also check the next issue of the magazine to find out if you were right. I couldn't find too much else of interest in this issue, so before moving on to the game listing, I'm going to skip to the back cover where typically I'd be showing you a Micropower advert, but at this point in time Micropower was starting to scale down their output, so instead Superior Software tended to take over the back cover of the Micro user with their full page adverts. This one's for one of their most famous games, Repton, which really marked the start of their high quality original productions. Along with 6 screenshots of the game, there's also some cartoony artwork representing the gameplay, and at the bottom you can see there's a competition that says when all 12 levels of Repton have been completed in succession, a congratulatory message is displayed on the screen. The first person to send us a photograph of the screen will win £100, and it had a closing date of the 30th of September 1985. So while it's not quite as striking as those earlier Micropower adverts, this is a pretty nice advert from Superior, and we'll be seeing plenty more of those over the coming episodes, I'm sure. Time now to move on to the final game listing of this episode, and this is Harbour Command by Jeff Key. The intro says Harbour Command is a fast-moving arcade game set in a small Cornish harbour during the last few months of the First World War. You are the harbour commander and have to defend it from the ravages of the Luftwaffe's latest aircraft. It then goes on to give more details about the gameplay, before saying the game is written for either joystick or keyboard and has 4 levels of play. It then goes into plenty of detail about the joystick and keyboard control and also the game options. This really is an excessively detailed overview of the game, to be honest. Towards the end of the introduction, it says the program runs in mode 2 and is just over 7K in length, so if you have a disk drive, the program will relocate itself when first run, and this happens automatically. It also advises not to type in line 80 until the program is running correctly, as you could enter an infinite loop if there's an error in your typing. Finally, it says if you don't have disks, you can omit line 40 and lines 22,000 onwards and save yourself a bit of work. Line 22,000 makes it sound like this program is going to be massive, but actually it's not as bad as it sounds. As is typical with most micro user listings, you then get a box out giving an overview of all the variables and procedures used in the program, and then the listing begins on the right hand side. What you'll begin to notice here is that every time a new procedure is defined, the line numbers jump up by 1,000. So the definition for prop game, for example, is on line 1,000, whereas the definition for prop move is line 2,000. Line 3,000 sees the definition of proc joy, and line 4,000 sees the definition of proc key. I'm sure you're getting the idea here. The listing continues later in the magazine, starting on page 138, and you can see that it actually only takes up 2 pages. So as I said, that line 22,000 that was mentioned is not as bad as it seems due to this unusual numbering format. Now if you noticed on that screenshot of the game, the harbour scene looks quite impressive, and that's drawn using proc scene, which is defined here. Surprisingly, for what looks like quite a complex drawing, this is a very short procedure at just 10 lines. It executes a for loop that reads values in from this data statement and also uses gcall, move and vdu commands to do something quite clever that I don't personally understand, because that's all there is to this procedure, and yet somehow it draws that quite impressive scene. As previously mentioned, the game also supports joystick control, so there's quite a lot going on here for what is a relatively short basic program, suggesting the coder was quite efficient here. Let's now see what the end product is like. The game begins with a really nice title screen, with the name of the game repeated in multiple colours, separated by similarly colourful biplanes. It's accompanied by a pretty decent rendition of Blow the Man Down, with a nice reverb effect. Once that's finished, you're asked if you want to see the instructions, and if you choose to do so, then they're displayed on a single Mode 7 page with a concise summary of the aim of the game along with the controls. When you move on from the instructions, you're then asked what difficulty level you want to play, ranging from 1 for easy to 4 for hard. After choosing your difficulty level and the control method, the Cornish harbour is drawn on the screen, the music plays again, and then the game begins, and you control the crosshairs as to shoot down the approaching planes before they bomb the boats in the harbour. The sooner you shoot the planes, the more points you'll get, and the game ends when all the boats have been destroyed. The game has really effective graphics, with the fractal generated landscapes giving a feeling of depth and the ruined tin mines on the hillside creating the look of a Cornish harbour quite convincingly. A 3D effect is achieved well with the landscape, and also with the enemy planes getting larger and more detailed as they come into range. Another nice touch is the fires that break out on the boats in the harbour when they're hit, which also serve as a reminder of which boats are most under threat. In terms of audio, as I've said, the introductory tune to the game is pretty decent, and the plane sound effects are good too, but the explosions are a bit weak. The gameplay is reminiscent of a level from the classic Beachhead, and would have fitted quite well into that game. It moves at a pretty good pace, and aiming your targeting crosshairs is quite accurate, though the reticule could move a bit more smoothly. Your choice of difficulty level affects the speed that the enemy planes come in and attack. Level 2 is about right for a challenging but playable experience, whereas level 4 is insanely fast. I think it would be better if the game speed increased over time, such as when you reach certain score thresholds. The idea of this being one long level that only ends when the fleet is destroyed is quite unusual, but it would probably be better if you had waves of planes to survive and got some boats back after a certain amount of time, with the speed of the game increasing at that point as I just suggested. Other ways to improve the game would be a limited amount of ammo so you couldn't just blast away, and a periodic bonus for shot accuracy. This would make it more of an arcade game and give a better feeling of progression. When the game inevitably ends, the commendation screen that's displayed is a neat touch, with your rank changing based on how well you did. There's no doubt this is a very polished game for a type-in written in BASIC, and not far off commercial quality. It needs a little more variety or progression in the gameplay, but the listing is not overly complex, so you could probably work some improvements into it, and even as it stands, it's a decent enough game to have been worth the effort of typing in. That brings this edition of the History of BBC Micro Typing Games to a close, and this was a pretty decent selection of games for the most part. In the last episode I wondered if we were going to see the majority of typing listings be more complex machine code offerings from now on, but this batch were predominantly basic ones with the exception of Snake Maze. Some of those basic listings were relatively short, and yet they yielded a couple of good games. Catnapper was nothing special to look at, but the idea was quite original and the gameplay required fast reactions and a little bit of strategic thinking too. Harbour Command had fairly straightforward gameplay, but the visuals were impressive and it was close to being a commercial quality game with good presentation and joystick support. These were my two favourites from this batch of games, and with both coming from the pages of the Micro user, it's easy to see why the magazine was so highly regarded by Beeb users. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a thumbs up and let me know any thoughts you have about the games or magazines I've looked at. If you want to try any of the games out yourself or browse the mags in more depth, check out the pinned comment for links to them all. If you'd like to support my efforts and influence the future direction of this channel, please click on the join button below the video for more information about becoming a member. In the next episode of this series, I'll finish my coverage of 1985, with 5 more magazines and games lined up that span September to December. Between now and then, please keep your eye on this channel for more retro gaming content. Thanks very much for watching this video, and until the next time, see ya!